dive into two ancient texts. One's a famous miracle, the other is a brutal military history. And on the surface, you'd think they have absolutely nothing to do with each other. But, as you're about to see, they share a connection that is so strange, so specific, that it's become this incredible historical mystery. It sounds like the start of a bad joke, right? What could a man possessed by spirits possibly have in common with an organized army of soldiers? Well, the answer is kinda hidden in two very different stories about a very violent event, and they both happen in the exact same place. All right, first up, let's turn to a story a lot of you might already know, from the Gospel of Mark. It's one of the most dramatic and, let's be honest, pretty bizarre supernatural encounters in the entire New Testament. So, the story is set in the country of the Gadarenes. And here Jesus runs into this guy who's in a really, really bad way. He's living out among the tombs, totally cut off from society. The text says he's so strong that nobody can restrain him, not even with chains. He just spends all his time, day and night, screaming and hurting himself. I mean, it's just this terrifying picture of pure chaos. So when Jesus asks the spirit for its name, the answer he gets is, honestly, it's chilling. It says, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Now you have to remember, for the people hearing this in the first century, living under Roman rule, that word, legion, wasn't just some random name. It was a direct shout out to the biggest unit in the Roman army, a force of thousands of soldiers. It's this statement of overwhelming, occupying force, a real power move. And what happens next is basically a negotiation. The Legion of Spirits actually begs Jesus not to send them out of the country. And instead, they make this super specific request: send us into that huge herd of pigs feeding over there. And Jesus says, okay. He gives them permission. And get this, we're not talking about a handful of pigs here. The text is very, very specific about the size of this herd. It's about 2,000 of them. You know, that detail isn't just thrown in there for no reason. It's meant to show you the massive, almost military-level scale of the spiritual power we're dealing with. And this is where the story just explodes into this violent climax. As soon as the spirits enter the pigs, the entire herd, all 2,000 of them, just stampedes. The text says they ran violently down a steep place into the sea and drowned. It's a chaotic, dramatic, watery end. Okay, so really lock that image in your mind. A huge multitude rushing violently downhill to its death in the water. All right, now we're gonna completely switch gears. We're jumping out of the world of miracles and into the, cold, hard facts of military history, as seen through the eyes of the famous first-century historian Flavius Josephus in his work, The War of the Jews. So, Josephus tells us about this specific Roman campaign that happened during the Jewish revolt. The Roman general Vespasian attacks the city of Gadara. The city falls, rebels try to flee, but a Roman commander chases them relentlessly, cornering them all the way at the Jordan River. And the battle that happens at the river, it's an absolute massacre. And just like in that first story, Josephus is super specific with his numbers. He says 15,000 of the Jewish rebels were killed in the fighting. Just a staggering number of people. So what about the rest of them? Well, Josephus writes that a prodigious number, which just means a huge, uncountable crowd, they were trapped and were, quote, unwillingly forced to leap into the Jordan where they drowned. Sound familiar? A massive group driven against their will down into a body of water to die. Okay, so now we've got these two accounts from ancient history. One is this supernatural exorcism. The other is a brutal military report. They seem totally unrelated, right? But are they really? And this is where things get really, really interesting. Because when you put the key details from the miracle story and the battle report right next to each other, a pretty mind-blowing pattern starts to show up. Okay, let's break this down. First up, location. Mark's gospel says the country of the Gadarenes. Josephus talks about the city of Gadara. Check. Then the name. The spirit is called Legion. The historical attacker is a Roman legion. Check. The action. A herd runs violently down a hill. A huge crowd of people are driven down to a river. And the end? In both stories, you have a mass drowning in water. I mean, come on. That is an incredible set of parallels. So here's the million-dollar question. What in the world do we make of all this?
Is it just some unbelievable one in a million coincidence that two stories from the same time and place share all of these very specific, very dramatic details? Or is there something deeper going on here?
And that question brings us right to the heart of this whole mystery. And believe me, there is no single easy answer. Scholars have been arguing about this for years, so let's just walk through some of the main ideas people have come up with to explain this.
Okay. First, maybe it's just a wild coincidence that the parallels are totally accidental. It's possible, I guess. Second, there's the idea of a historical metaphor, that the miracle story isn't about a literal demon at all, but is this powerful, symbolic retelling of the Roman invasion. Casting the destructive Roman legion as a spiritual evil that gets cleansed from the land. And then there's the third idea, and this is a really fascinating one, the powerful concept of collective memory.
So let's talk about this idea of collective memory. Think about it. Really traumatic events like a wartime massacre, they don't just disappear. They get burned into the memory of a whole community. The idea here is that the historical slaughter at Gadara was so shocking that the story was told and retold. And over time, it may be transformed into the supernatural tale we read in the gospel, a way of processing a real historical trauma through the language of faith and story. So in the end, we're not left with some easy answer. We're left with a really deep question about how history gets remembered and retold. Whether it was a literal miracle, a powerful metaphor, or the reshaped memory of a horrible massacre, the link between the Legion of Spirits and the Legion of Soldiers is just undeniable. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other real histories are hidden just beneath the surface of the stories we think we already know?